Hello, everyone. Madilynn Dale here with the Chapter Goddess, and I have another fantastic guest for the book chat today. We are going to be discussing her work, life, and anything else that just comes up in conversation. So let me bring her in. So go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
Yes. Hi, Maddie. My name's Tina Fumo, and I wrote a book called Fancy Prison, Calling BS on the Child Welfare Industry. And it's a true story account of what we went through I'm in Canada, so we went through the provincial child welfare system. Like here it's per province, and you're there in the states, I understand. So each of your states has your own sort of CPS, your Child Protective Service, or DCS, or whatever you call it down there. And so I was just very blindsided by the whole thing. It was not at all supportive to families as I thought it was supposed to be, or at least I thought that's what my tax paying dollars were paying for. And so I dropped my life and went there to help my daughter right after she had given birth. And still, with my presence there, at 2 weeks old, our 2-week-old baby was taken from us and put into the foster care system. Now, we got her back, and you would think it would be easy to get back your flesh and blood child. It was anything but. Like we went through hell. We went through absolute hell until by some stroke of luck, we got a judge who had half a brain, and he could just see through kind of the BS, and he just got them to back off, and that was sort of the end of our story. But I was just never the same person again. I'm like, what is going on? Like these are little babies that are being taken from parents who, nobody's perfect. So I don't get this. Are they expecting perfection from people?
That is rough. Like, I want to ask why, but I don't know if you're comfortable with answering that question, so I can cut this out if you.
Well, the why. I understand you haven't read the book, Maddie, so I'll definitely have to remedy that. I'll send you a copy of it. It's easily available on Amazon, but I'll make my plug later. But the reasons would always change, and so even though the reason why they initially knocked on my daughter's door ended up not being the reason, 6 or 7 months later, wasn't the same reason. It kept changing according to what systematic marker we were in our battle. So it's like, it was almost like they were just going by their game plan. Oh yeah, we're 3 months into this. Okay, we're going to insert this reason. So there was just no objectivity, no justice to it at all. It was just very much systematic. And to them, it's a numbers game. They take as many kids as they can, put them into provincial care because the funding follows the child. And a lot of times parents run out of resources if they even had them in the first place. So they're specifically targeted, for lack of a better word, because they're poor, perhaps uneducated. They don't know, what their rights are or how to fight for their rights. And their poverty is criminalized, so they're made to feel like they're going to be the worst parents on the face of this earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that me or you?
Yeah. That was me. Sorry. I didn't know it picked it up. I was like, oh, snap. Sorry. So in writing the book, how long did it take you to put all of this chaotic stuff that happened to you guys down in a physical version?
Oh, that's a good question. It was very interesting, the process that happened when I was writing this, because this ordeal happened to us 5 years ago. My granddaughter is now 5 years old, and she's she's the light of our life. She started kindergarten. She's just a typical happy little girl. And about 2.5 years ago, I lost my job in March 2020, like everybody else.
Good old pandemic.
Yeah, when the world shut down. And after a month or 2 or 3, I'm thinking, this is a really good time for me to write a book about this ordeal we went through. At that time, it was 3 years ago. And I participated online with an author challenge that summer. Long story short, I won their publishing prize.
Yes.
And then that got the ball rolling. So because I've never written a book before, and I didn't really know where to start because, like you said, you got all this stuff, and the fact that the story in itself is quite confusing and stressful, and it was very fluid. We had a lot of things coming at us in the year 2017 just because of what they put us through. So the guideline, after I won the prize, the guideline took a long time to write, but it was really effective because it took about 2 months, I think, of going back and forth with the publisher. Just writing down, okay, like let's sort of, okay, here are the points I want to make. So I have sort of groupings of post-its, okay, like chapter structure, okay, sections. And even though the end of the book wasn't exactly how the guideline was, it gave me a roadmap so that I could eventually go from that start to the end of the book. Wow. And so once that guideline was done, it took about 2 months, and then the actual writing took about 6 months, and then I submitted the first draft. So, and that was the easiest part, was the writing part. The guide was a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be, but it was quite effective. What I hated was the editing, okay? Yes. I absolutely hated the editing. I'm like, oh my God, this is so tedious. But the publisher said, it's normal, Tina. When you get to the point where you are sick of looking at, fancy prison, and you feel like, because it's never going to be perfect, but he goes, when you get to that point, then it's time for you to pass it off to us with our final proofreading and formatting and stuff like that. And they had suggestions along the way, which was good in the editing process. And I'd say about 90% of my editing, it wasn't really grammatical errors, because I've been reading all my life and I'm a pretty good speller. It was more clarification, because the content of the book was so confusing. They would come back, well, I don't understand this, or Tina, make notes, like they make a note here, like elaborate here. I don't understand this. I don't understand. And some of it was because, like, I'm a Canadian writer, so I'm trying to translate it, in a way that the reader can understand it. So a couple of times there were Canadian terms in there that they didn't understand. So I had to make it more general, so anybody can understand it. And then a lot of it is just writing in a way that the reader will understand you and you can get your point across. And then, but leaving enough room that the reader can draw their own conclusions, kind of thing, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah. It does. And that's crazy. And it also, it's amazing what bringing in another set of eyes does, to the manuscript, because there's so many things I've caught myself where I will leave out small words like a or the, or even or and sometimes. And somebody will come and look at it and plug it in for me. And I'm like, oh, I just read that as if it was there. And
yeah. And that changes the meaning of what you had written. Yeah.
Yes.
My husband actually ended up being my first editor. So every single rough chapter before I submitted it to the publisher, he would read it. And he was actually pretty good, because if he was confused by something, if he said, well, I didn't understand this, because I had to read it 3 times. Like, I understand what you were trying to say because I was there, but your reader's not. So he was actually a really good editor. Yeah.
That's good. So altogether, how long would you say it took to put the book together?
About a year. Yeah.
About a year.
It took about a year. Yeah.
That's pretty impressive for that.
Yeah, I guess so. They had the publishing prize I won is from a company called Bestseller Publishing. And they have this kind of hybrid ghostwriting where they have like a coach who help you do all the writing yourself, but they're very, they give you a lot of guidance. So that's what I used was their hybrid ghostwriting system. And it, like I said, I found it very effective because that initial guideline, like I said, it took more work than I thought, but I think that's what made the writing so much easier. Like once I sat down and started flowing, the chapters almost wrote themselves because I knew the story,
That's good. Did you find that one section of your story was more difficult to get out than others?
Yeah. I wrote a chapter about you've heard about the Indigenous situation where unmarked graves are being found here in Canada. I'm sure but there's a chapter in there because I couldn't write a book about the Canadian child welfare system without mentioning Indigenous kids and how represented they are in our system. So I didn't go into a lot of detail in that chapter because I'm not Indigenous and it's not my story to tell. But that's the chapter I had the most trouble with because I must have rewritten it about 4 times because I honestly couldn't find someone that was willing to talk about in residential schools. I think a lot of them who did survive, they just don't talk about it anymore,
Yeah, so, I can imagine it would be difficult to discuss it, honestly. Because that's a very dark part of the past, and it happened both in Canada area and here. So it happened. Like it's a history that needs to be known, but it's also one that's not easily shared. So
yeah.
Oh.
So for that reason, I did find that chapter quite difficult to write. And, I still don't think I got it right, but I tried, and I tried to do it in a respectful way because again, I'm not going to prescribe to them what I think the story's about. I think right now I've been doing a lot of, I have a lot more awareness, I think, of trauma and doing things trauma informed now. And one thing that always comes up is creating a safe space. So I think it's really important that stories are heard and human beings are protected in that space so they have a safe space to tell their story,
That is very true. And that is very good to create that space for stories to be shared. It's hard. It's very hard in this crazy world. Everybody's fighting for that safe space, but it's just hard.
Yeah, it's difficult being that vulnerable, I think, because that opens you up for being attacked. So for sure.
So with the story, when you finished it, did you feel a sense of healing or anything similar to that? Did it help to get it out?
It did. Yeah, it did. I think during the whole process of what we went through, I would journalize a lot of things because it was just so confusing and I just had so much stress and so many thoughts swirling around in my head. It did help me to write it out and just put it into perspective. But yeah, I think the book, the one thing that my book doesn't have, it doesn't have like a go-to, but I think that's what's being done now is just more advocacy and activism. Like, for example, next week I've been invited to go to a meeting on child protection. So I'll bring my book there and then I'm not really going to tell my story because the book speaks for itself, but I have some ideas on how to, again, create sort of maybe that safe space and a little bit of empathy and compassion. So we'll see how it goes as a facilitator of what I want to do. Yeah. So maybe after you read my book, we can do this again. Yeah.
Hey, I would definitely love to. So the title, I know that a lot of the story and stuff, what chose you to call it a fancy prison? Where does that name come from?
That name comes from my daughter. Part of the what we went through was we had to abide by court orders. One was a supervision order and one was a custody order. So I took temporary custody of my granddaughter, which I was fine with.
Yeah.
And supervision order over my daughter, which she was not fine with, but we had to do it in order to get the, off her backs. And she started to dub it fancy prison because she could not be trusted with her own baby. So it was extremely humiliating for her. And we had to go through it. We had to sort of push through it. But she was always like, oh, here we go, back to fancy prison. So yeah, the name stuck.
That is too funny. Oh, sorry, hold on. Bye-bye.
Oh, you got a little monkey there.
No, Harrison, headphones are not, okay. No, okay. Hey, go finish watching cartoons. Go, Bum. Seriously, go. Harrison, go. Go. Hey.
He looks a little bit younger than my granddaughter.
He is. You said she was 5. He's 4. So he started pre-K this year, and he likes to randomly come in, which that was... I turned cartoons on for him. I was like, I've got an interview. When I get done, we got to get ready for karate. So he's a mess. Totally lost my train of thought then when he did. I was like, oh gosh.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's a good thing you're not live though, eh? That's why.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. And he has done that in the middle of a few lives. I have a friend. He's decided, he's like, I'm just going to call Harrison my nemesis because it never fails. He comes and steals the show and all of the people like it. And I'm just like, yeah. And it's crazy. So, okay. I remember what it was. All right. So with the emotions and everything and having to build back your daughter's confidence with her time calling it the fancy prison, how did you guys find that balance to get back to where you could function better with everything that was going on?
Time helped. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And respecting boundaries. I don't think my daughter ever once felt I was trying to undermine her and take away custody of her baby. Mm-hmm. She always trusted me that I was there as support only to help her get through this. So that helped with because you have to have that trust there. And then the boundaries helped because mm-hmm. For example, I'm a morning person and my daughter's a night person. Mm-hmm. So she'd be up late, piddling around in the kitchen or doing laundry till midnight, 1 a.m. And I would get up at 4 or 5 a.m. And I'd go into her room and get the little bassinet with the little sleeping baby and come out, watch the sunrise with having my morning coffee. And I have to tell you, kind of the joke was on them because those moments you don't get to create those moments of life ever. But that was definitely I was recharged. That was very reaffirming for my soul to have those mornings with my grandbaby while she was sleeping away with my morning coffee because I love my morning coffee and watching the sun come up. But then my daughter would be sleeping in, of course, because she was up late. And so all that time when in the morning when I'm, piddling around and I'm taking care of her and letting her mom sleep, I'm going through in my head, sorting through all this stuff that we're, having to go through. So that, finally at, say 10 in the morning, the baby's crying. She needs to be breastfed. And I burst into her room and I'd be like, I've been telling her all the stuff that I've been thinking of. And she's like, Mom,
give me the baby. Let's feed the baby first.
Just give me some space here. Don't come at me with all this, MCFD, this and all that first thing in the morning. All right. So yeah, we had to sort of get to know and respect each other's buffer zones.
That would be hard to figure out, but it also sounds nice having the extra hands there to help with the baby. So, and that comes from my perspective that when I had my son, my family lives 4.5 hours away and My in-laws are at a different part of their life. They have a 16-year-old as well. So,
oh, okay.
and they weren't able to be as involved either because it was just chaos. But just that sitting with your morning coffee while the baby's still sleeping, that just sounds awesome right now. And that's probably because I don't get that much sleep as it is. Life is crazy. So, as a mom, period.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me wonder, moving forward, once everything was all and over, did you guys celebrate finally like being free of everything? Or do they still like hover? Like, hey, we need to check on you.
No, I think they normally do that with families who maybe got out with the skin, by the skin of their butts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with ours, because we weren't intimidated by them and because we had a judge who finally sided with us, there was a fair bit of finality to ours. And quite frankly, by the end of it, I think the social workers were glad to get rid of me, Grammy, because they were kind of, they were a bit shocked. Like, they just did not realize that how I would be, like how invested I was in making sure that my daughter had support and that I wasn't, like, for example, when during the actual act of taking the 2-week-old child, which I describe in my book, but there aren't really words to describe how incredibly shattering that was. During that time, they were underhandedly asking me, oh, so what do you do for a living? And I'm looking at them like, what? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around how manipulative that was. It's like, you're taking my grandbaby, but you're asking me what I do for a living? Like what the, can I swear on this
You
podcast?
can. Yes, you absolutely can. Get it out.
That's seriously what I felt like. What the fuck? Like, what? So, but what they were trying to do was find out how long I could stay there until I had to go back to my job. And to this day, and I will never reveal that information because on principle, it's none of your business what I do for a living. That's my granddaughter. And what you're doing is wrong. You have no right to be taking her at all. I think in the beginning it was because there was an allegation that my daughter was a meth head. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you've done a test. You've tested her urine. It's clean. You tested the placenta. It's come back clean. Why are we still in court? Like, I don't understand what evidence you have that you're basing this on. Yeah. And like I said, their reasons, that initially was their call, but then the reasons would keep changing after that. And the reasons were just downright lies. It was just BS, They were just inserting reasons in there with no evidence, no reasoning behind them at all. Like, it was just a routine.
Yeah. So with dealing with them, what were some of the things you found to be most surprising that you didn't expect?
Ooh, so many things. I think just that, and like how manipulative they were and how unprofessional they were. I thought social services was supposed to help families. Mm-hmm. And to me, what was most shocking is how blatantly they don't. Like, you're lying. You're doing all these things that don't make any sense. And so, yeah, I guess that's what was most shocking to me is the lack of common sense. Just, there was none of it. And you're not even pretending to have it. There's just no common sense here. Never mind the fact that you're not even following your own policies. You're making up the rules as you go along. Like, it's just, it's really a miracle that we ended up getting the outcome that we did, because it was incredibly confusing. And we were just so blindsided. I was so blindsided by it. I really was, And I think in the past, I always had an impression of social workers because I had a very good guidance counselor, social worker. And when I went to high school, I actually dedicated the book to her. She, well, she's one of the ladies, yeah, but she was a social worker. And I guess that was always my impression of social worker. Like this woman, she did a lot for me. She was an amazing person. So, I mean, yeah, that bar's pretty high, but I mean, they weren't even, they weren't even like a fraction of what I thought of what she was, um, to be helping families. So yeah, I don't know. It's just it was a really, really confusing, stressful situation. Yeah, and I'm a better writer than I am a speaker because
yes, the author world. Yes, I get that.
I mean, I seem to go all tongue tied, but at least when you write, you can get your word down, look at it, and like, okay, yeah, that's the right word. When you're talking, you have to. Yeah, it's not that concrete, right?
Yes. No, I told my husband, I was like, it's easier to write stuff out because my thoughts don't work in order. They're like everywhere. So, and it goes for everything. Like you just have to like almost sit, just like, okay, just slow the brain process down and just go with it. So with the book, having the experience and everything, did you find yourself having to research anything to like add in to make it more sense, it make more sense? Sorry, sometimes.
Well, no, I don't think I never. I don't know if I ever made it make more sense because the whole thing just doesn't make any sense. Hence the title, calling BS on the child welfare industry. But I did read a lot of books about similar cases because I wanted the reader again to have somewhere to refer. It's like, I'm not making this up. I talk about a few other cases, and if you still don't believe me, here's some other books and other cases that you can read. So that's, I did read a lot more. And in a few of those books, I did quote something in one in particular, which was quite interesting that I put that quote in my book. Yeah.
So I'm going to take you to the writing process here. So in writing this book, you said it was a lot harder to do, and the editing, you said was that the hardest part for you? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now that your book is out, how do you feel? Do you feel like you've reached a point where you've been successful, or are you aiming for a specific goal with it?
No, I don't think I've been successful with it yet. I think it's getting better. Mm-hmm. I think the book gives me more credibility when we're trying to raise awareness about this problem, because this problem's been going on for quite a long time, actually. Mm-hmm. And so my book at least adds a little more proof of the problem in the system. So I don't think we're quite there yet that it needs to be talked about more, but we're definitely better than we were I think 2 years ago. And also, I think COVID has kind of exposed everybody to the failings of our government because again, they seem to create these policies that they don't even know what they're doing or what they're talking about. And then they don't even follow their own policy. So they kind of make up the rules as they go along. So yeah, I think COVID, magnified that as well. So, but take those instances and, with the government getting sort of intruding into your life, imagine if the stakes were your kids and that they had the power to take your kids, which they do.
Yeah, that's like a whole other level. So,
yeah. But interestingly enough, there has been a documentary that just came out on Netflix about the issue of, so I was saying that the hardest chapter for me to write was the one on Indigenous children. So there is a movie right now out on Netflix. It's called For Love, and it's about that specific issue. So it's great. But it's out there. It's not great what happened, but it's great that now it's out in the open. People are talking about it, because how can you even hope to come up with solutions if you can't even admit there's a problem. And I think for a long time, it's been swept under the carpet or dismissed or whatever. They've sort of reasoned out, oh, no, it's not a problem. This doesn't happen to our community, blah, blah, blah. No, I think that any child failed in the system, dying in foster care, that child is everybody's child. And that child, yes, that child, like this child on this, for example, on the cover of my book, people ask me, is that my granddaughter? And I tell them, no, it's not my granddaughter, but it's someone's granddaughter, I can assure you. And her name is Delana Sullivan. And about 10 years ago, she was taken from a loving mother. She was 4 months old. She had just had her doctor's appointment with her 4-month checkup. Everything was fine, healthy, happy little girl. And then things happened. Social workers showed up on Jamie's doorstep, took her baby. And 6 days later, within a week, that baby was dead in foster care. Okay, so I don't go into that in my book, but where do you go with that kind of pain and hatred and again, we were so lucky we got our baby back. She didn't grow up in foster care. She's exactly where she's supposed to be, being raised by her mother who loves her like crazy. And I mean, Jamie and Marilyn, Delana's family, they were very honored when I asked them if I could use her picture for my book. But again, I go into the story about the first time I heard about Delana Sullivan in the book, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. This shouldn't be happening.
Sorry, it's hard to process that. So that as a mom, that is the worst fear ever for any of us. So whew. You have successfully got me almost in tears, which is not a bad thing. Because it's okay. That's why
I liked writing it. A couple of podcasts have got me crying, which I don't really like because I like to keep my composure. But that's why I liked writing, because I would just bawl my eyes out and get all that emotion out. And when you're reading it too, no one's around. You can bawl your eyes out. That's okay. So save it.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you if it was healing writing the story down, because it did. It made you push through all of that and put it out there. To get that information, to bring awareness, which is extremely, extremely important for this world, because so many things have been swept under the rug, like you said, and it's just, it's got to stop. So,
yeah. Within the first week of the book coming out, I got a call from a friend I knew, and she had told me that, Tina, I read your book. You're such a good writer, and I was bawling my eyes out. And then she proceeded to tell me about what had happened to her when she was young. She was in the foster care system. And I had no idea. And it kind of made sense. It would explain some of the problems that she has today with drugs and alcohol, like what she went through. Perhaps it was unresolved. But I mean, I've told her then, and I'll say it again on the off chance she is watching this, but when if children are put into foster care, and for whatever reason, if their parents were tricked or made to sign something that they couldn't take back, or if it's legitimate, they really did need to be taken away and put into protective custody, whatever happened to them when they were young, it's not their fault. They're kids. And it's our job as adults to take care of our children until they're old enough to take care of themselves. So that having failed, it's okay to cry. It's okay to grieve the loss of your childhood, because again, it is not their fault. And I think that grief, that crying, that process is really important so that you can let it go and move on with your life. Otherwise, you're just always going to be stuck in that trauma. It's just going to,
and it just keeps kind of churning and getting worse.
And cyclical and multi-generational. Yeah. So, like I said, for her, she probably needs to address her problems because drugs and alcohol are never the problem. They're usually masking some kind of trauma.
Yeah, it's a mask to try to push it away and numb it, numb the pain.
And deal with the pain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So this is kind of like therapy by Maddie, and
yes, that's what it's kind of turning into. And it's, but this book, I think a lot of even listeners, viewers, you need to give it a read because there is a lot in the system, and especially, I'm totally probably going to get in the soapbox a little bit with this, especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Like the system is going to be flooded before long with parents that didn't want their kids or didn't want to have a kid or anything in that whole big thing. Like it's going to be chaos. So it needs to be like, we need to be aware of what is going on with that. So sorry, I didn't mean to bring don't bring a political thing in, but like,
no. Well, I think you're on the right path there because I think, and in Canada, we don't have Roe versus Wade. So, thankfully people can still go to women. It's their body, so they have a choice. But you're quite right. And I think that Roe versus Wade, from what I've read, is that it disproportionately affects poor women. Perhaps, the ones who are perhaps being abused at home or like sort of raped by their boyfriends at home, and they're just giving him sex to appease him, but really it's not their choice. And then they get pregnant, and then what are they going to do? Like maybe they have 2 or 3 other kids that they're already struggling to take care of, and they certainly don't need another one. So yeah, I don't think that decision was made out of any kind of healing or love or anything like that. I think that's pure politics. And it's like, how can we control women's bodies? And how can we make sure that the system keeps perpetuating itself? Because we can't have this system unless we have kids in the system being taken from their parents and put into the system because of the funding that follows with them.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a cold, callous way to look at it, and it's very corrupt as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it's very, right now, the way that the social workers are going into people's homes and invading their family lives is very transactional. So somewhere along the line, somebody took love and commitment and, intent, positive intent out of the equation, and now it's all about control.
That is insane. And it's, well, I'm going to wrap us up here, Tina. So go ahead and tell our viewers and listeners where they can find you and your work.
Yep. And probably the easiest way to find me on social media and get links to my book is just Google Fancy Prison by Tina Fumo, so you can see my name, I think, at the bottom here. But put my name in there, because if you Google Fancy Prison, you're going to end up with like, the best prisons in the world kind of thing, to serve out white-collar crimes. That's not what my book is about. It's Fancy Prison, calling BS on the child welfare industry. So when you Google that, it will send you to an Amazon link. I'm in Canada, so it's amazon.ca, but in other parts of your country, it's .com or wherever in the world. And then it will go back to podcasts like this. And then you can also find links to my social media. I'm on LinkedIn every day and Facebook pretty much every day. I haven't quite figured out TikTok yet, so don't ask me about TikTok yet or anything. Yeah. I can do Instagram only because it's linked in with Facebook, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, TikTok's a mess. So.
I don't know.
But thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Maddie. Thanks for having me.